Hello, Granite City High School. This is the Education Podcast. I am Peter Dimitrov, and I'm sitting here today with Mrs. Erin Mueller,
Hello.
our Spanish teacher. And we today are going to be talking about language education in the U.S. and other places. Miss Mueller, what do you think about the attitude to studying foreign languages here in America?
Well, I guess I could start with the attitude here, I guess, in Granite City and just in high schools in general. What I experienced being a teacher in many different high schools is that a lot of kids take Spanish because it's required for whatever requirement high school that they have. It could be like 2 years of a foreign language or fine arts, like it's considered here in Granite City. We're a fine art. Don't know why, but we are. But some kids take it because they legitimately want to learn it. Some kids, I think, because foreign languages in high schools are designated as electives, they consider it as an easy class, like an elective equals easy. And I do not believe that. I believe anything worthwhile is going to be challenging. So learning Spanish isn't necessarily going to be easy. You can make it super easy. You can make it all about like matching, the English to the Spanish, or playing games all the time, or speaking in English all the time, and just learning about Spanish, but not learning Spanish. But I feel like if it's worthwhile, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. And so I'm trying to change that attitude, and so kids understand that it's not an easy A. So you really have to actually acquire the language, which requires work from everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely all about the practice when it comes down to it, because studying raw theory doesn't really stick.
It doesn't.
Unless you actually have somewhere to apply it.
That's the grammar rules, right? So like a lot of classical language study has been grammar, textbooks, activities that are kind of divorced from any sort of meaning, and I'm trying to not do it that way. My method that I use is called comprehensible input, and it's all about like making vocabulary personal and making it understandable and using as much as possible, not memorizing lists, regurgitating them, and then forgetting them, because that's absolutely useless. That's how I learned French, and I've got Je m'appelle Aaron after 4 years, and that's all I have. So,
yeah. Speaking of other languages other than Spanish, I definitely feel that there is an attitude amongst Americans that, aside from Spanish, there is really no need to learn any other languages, because there is a mindset that everyone knows English, and wherever you go, people will be able to speak it.
Yeah.
And so, but on the flip side of that, when people come here not knowing English, it is expected of them to learn it.
Yes,
and
quickly.
Yes.
You got to know it, yeah.
And you cannot expect of an American to know your native language, which is sort of a double standard which should not be tolerated,
Right.
I think. So perhaps the solution to that would be a bit more variety in the languages you can learn in high school. For example, German or French or something like that.
I agree. I think we should offer different types of languages, or like Japanese, Chinese, something that's completely 100% foreign, where the alphabet doesn't even look anything like letters to us, more like symbols. Anything that would be awesome. However, of course, we run into the blockade of funding. There's just no funding for it. The schools are always losing funding. Well, that's a different topic, but I mean, they really are. And so we just don't have the money for different languages. I mean, I'm hoping that in the next few years we can kind of change that with maybe some staff changes. There could be like people retiring. Instead of replacing a teacher with another Spanish teacher, we could replace that teacher with like a French teacher or a German teacher, so we have more variety for the kids.
I wanted to touch on the topic of how much Spanish you need to learn to actually consider yourself fluent in it. And this applies to any language, but I'm using Spanish as an example because I've had experience with it, and you are a Spanish teacher after all. So in my previous high school, it was a language specialized high school, so you could choose English or Spanish to specialize in. And then aside from that, you would also need to study a second language. So if you choose Spanish as your first language to study, then you also have to take English, but not as much English. And of course, you have Bulgarian classes, but at that point, they're pretty much just literature. So what I did is I decided, well, I already know English, so I'm gonna go for Spanish. And my 8th grade year was hell because I had 20 hours of Spanish a week, not full like hours. Our classes were 45 minutes, but I have 20 Spanish classes a week. And
But you took like science in Spanish,
yeah,
like
and
that.
yeah, after your 8th grade year, you take your sciences in Spanish, your geography too.
Wow.
And that's what I wanted to talk about. That I do think is the case that if you really want to learn a language, you have to study it a lot to actually get it in your head and to
do.
make it stick.
So true, so true. I mean, my experience is I took Spanish my 7th and 8th grade year, and then in high school I took French for 4 years, and I hated it. So then I went back to Spanish in college, and I was getting ready to graduate with my bachelor's degree, and I couldn't speak Spanish. I mean, I could read it, I could write it, I could understand it, but I couldn't speak it because I never was immersed in it. So my last semester at WashU, I went to Chile, and I spent 6 months there, and it was the best thing ever. Like for the first 2 weeks, I had no idea what was going on. I had the worst headache. It was really hard, and then all of a sudden, I was on the bus one day, and all that background noise, like it became words, and I stood up, and I was like, I understand everything. It was like this epiphany. It was wonderful, but you need that, and trying to replicate that like less than 1 hour a day for 5 days a week, it's really hard. It's challenging. So, I mean, really to get halfway decent at it, you really have to take all 4 years. You really do.
Oh, yeah, definitely. As a matter of fact, I do think that even that, is not enough for you to be fluent in Spanish, and that is of no fault of your own. It's just the curriculum is structured like that.
We don't have a curriculum. But okay.
Right. It'd
trying.
be nice
I'm
to have
making
some.
one.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have some Spanish books and stuff, but I
Not
guess
textbooks, but yes. But
yeah,
books, yes.
yeah, definitely. And also that what you said about living in Chile, I do think that is really what helps the most because I spent 2 weeks in Spain with a friend in 2016, and
Barcelona.
Valencia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Valencia is like hipster Barcelona. It's a lot better. But anywho, and in the beginning, we had to call the family whose apartment we were staying for the 2 weeks to pick us up from the airport. And it was just me and my friend, no parents or anything. And we're standing at the airport, and we call the number, and they start talking to us, and I just freeze up on the phone because I kind of understand what they're saying, but I'm scared to speak. And I was really nervous in the beginning. I almost didn't say anything, but by halfway through the first week, I really kind of got into the groove of it, and and even the words I didn't know, I kind of improvised, and I really did manage to communicate with the native speakers. So I do think that being in an environment where everyone speaks the language.
You're forced to, yes. You have to sink or swim. It's like survival mode. Like you have to do it. You have to communicate. And people aren't going to cater to you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's fabulous. It's essential. I wish we had something like a program where we did take the kids abroad. That, of course, costs a lot of money to do that. Exchange, something would be wonderful. That would be awesome. But what we do have here at Granite is what they don't have at other schools. We have such a huge native speaker population, which is something that we could definitely work with to our advantage. I think it could be mutually beneficial. My idea for next year is to have a study hall where half the kids are native speakers of Spanish, the other half are serious Spanish students, and we just converse, tell each other stories. And then the kids who are the native speakers, they might need to work on their English, maybe. So we could have a day where the English speakers just speak to them and tell them stories about their life. Tell me about when you were your first day of school here. Tell me about, your favorite birthday memory, whatever. But just storytelling is hugely important. To be able to start to understand Spanish better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think that people would be very dismissive of studying any other language because if people can't be convinced that studying Spanish is important while living in America, being surrounded by Spanish, well, not surrounded, bordering a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, I find it very hard to believe that people will be interested in learning some very obscure language, even if it's not like French or German, or like Greek, for example. Like no one would think about learning that. But I do think that broadens your perspective on life for sure.
It does. It definitely does, and it gives you a type of understanding of culture and people that you can't get other ways. But with the advent of like Google Translate and other like apps like that, I think people are like, well, I don't need to learn the language because I have Google Translate or I have whatever. And so they don't think they need to learn it. But nothing can replace that like on the spot back and forth communication in a different language. I mean, no app can replace that. And it's wonderful to meet somebody who you think, oh, they don't know my language, and then they do, and they're like, you know, I mean, it's surprising. It's surprising, but it's nice. It's a pleasant surprise. And studying Spanish, it's like I can't think of. I feel like our country in general is like kind of behind the times. Whereas like in Bulgaria, you know, you have to learn English. Like they understand that you have to know it. It's a second language. It's something that's so useful in any sort of field of study, any sort of occupation you could choose. Which is the same thing for Spanish. Like I can't think of any job where knowing Spanish would be a detriment. It's always a benefit. But people say, well, I only need 2 years. So I'm like, you only need 2 years according to the rules here at the high school, but your life doesn't stop here.
Yeah.
Like, there are so many people you're going to run into in your daily life or in your future job. If you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're a pharmacist, if you're a teacher, if you even go into like building trades, you're going to run into so many people who speak Spanish. So why not be able to communicate with them? I just hope our schools get on board with promoting it more. I mean, because they don't really promote it. I feel like, I don't want to throw blame, but I feel like it's not really promoted, whereas it could be. And we do take 4 years of math. Nothing against math, but I took through AP Calc, and I use Spanish, of course, obviously, because I'm a Spanish teacher, but even before that, you know, it came up times where I would use Spanish more than I would use anything else. You know, so it's a skill that I feel like is necessary. Yes, take 4 years of math. Yes, of course. Take 4 years of English, but take 4 years of Spanish also, or a different language. You know, just it's necessary. It makes you more culturally rounded. It makes you less. I feel like we're very like egocentric with the United States is the best. The United States is like English is the best. Like, it's not a competition. It's about bridging that cultural understanding, like understanding other countries, the way they communicate, the way they speak, the way they form their sentences. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, especially with Spanish, there's like a whole world of like grammar and stuff that you have no idea of when you're studying Spanish as a second language, considering you know English as your first language. Because in the end of the day, they're all pretty similar, all derived from Latin and
yes, the Romance languages.
Even amongst the Latin-derived languages, English and Spanish are quite similar. And a lot of the grammar rules. Of course, there are some differences, but they're languages that have nothing in common, and not even like Hindu or like Japanese or anything like that. Just like Eastern European languages are like going to be a lot different. And I think that I see a lot of people that are having real problems understanding like some of the basic rules of Spanish. And some really basic things that people just like cannot comprehend them. And I think to myself, how are these people who cannot understand these relatively similar language, how can it be expected of them to learn a language that is totally different from their native one? And I think that comes with just like a different mindset and starting to study a foreign language very early on.
Very early on. Yes, getting like a feel for it. Yes, and an appreciation. Yeah.
And also, what year do you start studying Spanish here in America? What is like?
It's typically freshman year, so like 14 years of age. That's really late. I mean, that's definitely very late because it's already kids are, especially in their freshman year, they're already like self-conscious because they're freshmen and they don't want to speak, they don't want to try, they don't want to look like they're trying too hard, but then again they don't want to look stupid. So you have this class where you have to try to speak, but they don't want to because they're self-conscious because they're freshmen. It's just not work. It does not work out well.
I have the impression that the freshmen are the most confident.
Oh, really? Well, they might be the most like, maybe most like arrogant, I guess.
Yes.
Maybe,
that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I don't know. They just don't understand like their behavior sometimes, maybe. But I feel like if you start younger, like the kids like they just think it's fun and they get their pronunciation down really well. Like my girls know some Spanish and we're reading the books that we read in here, not in here in Spanish literature, but in Spanish 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, I read with them. And they can get them. Like we read a book in Spanish 3 called Tumba, and I'm having my 8-year-old and my 11-year-old read it. And we read it, and they just read it out loud, and I'm like, what does this mean? And they can figure out what it means just by looking at it because they know English, and they're not afraid to try to pronounce things. Like my youngest is really good at pronunciation. Like I say a word to her, and she's like, she's got it. Like she doesn't, because they're not afraid to try, and she has a good ear for. Well, they both do have a good ear for like sounds and language and music in general. They're good with music too, so I guess that's why. But start them early because they're not as like self-conscious, I guess.
Speaking of pronunciation, I've been really curious to ask this because you natively speak English, which has a very different pronunciation to Spanish. My first language being Bulgarian, it actually does have a pretty similar pronunciation to Spanish.
Oh.
You roll your R's and stuff like that, so I kind of
Ooh.
had that down. And honestly, if you can roll your R's, all of the rest is just like knowing where to put the accent on the words. But I wanted to know, how do you make the transition from saying el libro to saying el libro? Like, how do you transition?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I guess a lot of listening to native speakers speak, listening to music too helps. And I know I got a lot of my pronunciation down from listening to music and singing along to it and making it. Because you have to actually hold your mouth different. Like
Yeah.
English is like whenever we speak English, our mouths are really tight. Like they're like, bah, bah, bah. In Spanish, it's like you have to relax your jaw, and you have to. It's always easier to speak Spanish after a few cocktails. I'm not. That's not my personal experience. People have told me that. But when I went to Chile, of course, one of their biggest exports is wine. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try the Chilean wine. Well, after you drink a few glasses of Chilean wine, it's easier to speak Spanish. But, so it does help because like you do relax like yourself and your face and your jaw, and you're not like el libro. You're like el libro. You know,
Yeah.
just you have to.
Yeah.
I don't want to say mumble your words because that's not what I want to say, but just kind of relax your jaw. But when I do speak to students in class, I have to be very conscious of speaking slow. And I feel like in a way teaching Spanish has kind of ruined my Spanish because like I've been speaking slow Spanish for 15 years and like saying everything very like pronouncing every syllable, and that kind of speeded up here and there, but it's like I really have to work on making sure my job is making sure everything is comprehensible. And so that in a way has ruined my Spanish.
Well,
But it can always get better.
native speakers do speak very quickly sometimes, for sure.
In English we do as well, but we don't notice it. But yeah, it's the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah, definitely. And the thing that I think that a lot of people don't even understand, like the concept of, is like a phonetic language where the name of the letter is actually the sound it makes, not
Yes.
not like you, because you use you, but it's like like an sound.
Yes.
It's called you. Whereas in Spanish, it's
yeah.
and that's the sounds that those letters make, and that's
it.
something that people don't really understand.
Right. In
about.
English you have like the short and the long vowels. In Spanish it's just I, E, O, U, and they don't change unless they're paired
Yes.
together. Then they'll have like a little bit different sound, but it blends and it kind of makes sense when you put them together and you practice it. So yeah.
Well, okay. Thanks for the talk.
You're
and,
welcome.
Stay tuned for the next episode of the Education Podcast.
Yes, stay tuned. It's a good one.
Goodbye.
You'll learn something. Goodbye.